Yeah, I think we look good. I think we can go ahead and start.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Social Emotional Learning. And our presenters today are Melissa Isaac, David Sullivan, and Melody Redbird-Post. And I will allow themselves to introduce themselves in just a minute. Next slide, please. This event is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technical you would think I'd have this by now, excuse me. Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under the K-12 School Mental Health Supplement Project. We are located at the University of Iowa and part of the Mhttc network, serving American Indians and Alaska Natives across the US and Alaska. We provide TA for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and tribal communities and schools, as well as having several ongoing initiatives and projects for American Indian and Alaska Native communities. Next slide, please. This project is supported by SAMHSA. The content is developed by the presenters, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or the policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native Mhttc. Next slide, please. Although we are gathered virtually today, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the Indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this land acknowledgement, which was created by 3 of our members of our center, Ella and Keely Driscoll and Sean Baer. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I am your host today. I am the program manager for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, K-12 School Supplement. I am an enrolled member of the Kiowa Tribe and a descendant of the Lummi Tribe. I have a master's in business administration and a master's in educational leadership. I live in Tama, Iowa on the Meskwaki settlement with my husband and my granddaughter. Also with us today is my partner, Julia Bullitt. She is our research associate from the University of Iowa and has been assisting with the Mhttc K-12 projects for the last year, almost as long as I've been here. She holds a BA degree in psychology from Ball State University and a master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Iowa. Next slide, please. Kate Pruce, she is also a graduate assistant from the University of Iowa and has been with the Mhttc K-12 initiative since February of 2021. Kate holds a bachelor's in child, adult, and family services with a minor in psychology from Iowa State University, and she is currently working on her master's in school counseling at the University of Iowa. Next slide, okay. We are a national American Indian and Alaska Native Mhttc K-12 supplement grant. This program and many others are offered through our center located in Iowa City, Iowa, but we serve across the US and Alaska. Here you will find contact information for myself, the program manager, as well as a program guide for our other services and technical assistance request forms. Please reach out to us with any interest in these programs. Following today's event, you will be sent out following today's event, we will send you out a follow-up email to which will include the presentation slides and the recording and information about a request to receive CEUs, if applicable, or a certificate of completion. We will also like you to complete our evaluation survey that we will give to you at the end of this presentation today. Before I allow our panelists of experts to introduce themselves, I want to remind everyone that today's event is being recorded, so I ask that you are respectful to each other and our difference of opinions. You're more than welcome to ask questions during the presentation. Myself and Julia can interrupt the speakers, as well as providing a few minutes after the presentation for questions and answers. Before we get started today, this is my favorite part of the presentation. I would like to ask someone in the audience to start us off in a good way with either a blessing, a prayer, a song. drums, or anything that comes from the heart. And I'm going to give anybody a few minutes to decide who wants to come on and do a song, a blessing, a prayer, anything that comes to you. Words of wisdom.
I have a fun song that I taught the kindergarten kids that I work with.
Will you start by introducing yourself, Ruth?
Sure. I'm Ruth Stevenson. I'm a counselor in Montana. I work in the Harlem Elementary School, and I do K-3. And so last year, I based all of my lessons on the 7 grandfather teachings. And as best I could, I tried to share those values with them. And at one point we talked about the golden rule. And it was a fun song that I found online, but it has stayed with me. So if you're all right, I could share that song.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Sure. So it says, treat other people the way you want to feel. Treat other people like your friends. Make them smile and laugh and you'll be smiling too. Just follow that good old golden rule. There's a golden rule out there for us to follow. Kinda like a road to happiness. If I be nice to you and you be nice to me, we can live our lives in peace and harmony. Then the chorus goes back. Treat other people the way you want to feel. Treat other people like your friends. Make them smile and laugh and you'll be smiling too. Just follow that good old golden rule.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I know that took a lot of courage, and I truly appreciate that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's start with Melody. Melody, please introduce yourself for the audience.
Thank you, Teresa. It's a beautiful day today. It's really good to see all of you here. I'm Melody Redbird-Post, and I am here on behalf of the Anadarko Public Schools. I'm part of the Anadarko Public Schools Parent Committee. I also work in various capacities in specializing in early childhood education, instructional leadership, academic curriculum, and culturally revitalizing pedagogy and curriculum development, and have been working extensively with tribal communities and tribal programs in Oklahoma, as well as across the country for several years now. And I am located here in Anadarko, Oklahoma, Southwest Oklahoma, on the ancestral homelands of the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache people. And I am also a Kiowa tribal member. And it's good to be here. Thank you, Teresa. Back to you.
Thank you, Melody. And next we have Melissa Isaac.
Miigwech, Teresa. Minogijap, Wabdikwe Dijnakas, Minwa, Wabshki, Wabiguan, Dijnakas, Name Dodam, Saganachipwakin, and Donjaba. My name is Melissa Isaac. I am Sturgeon Clan. I am a citizen of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe in Michigan, and I am the education director there for the tribe's education system. We oversee a 2, 3, and 4-year-old early childhood immersion program. It's 100% immersion. And then we have a K-5 tribally controlled sovereign school. And then we also oversee the title programming for 3 surrounding school districts. I am a doctoral student right now at Central Michigan University, pursuing my doctorate in educational leadership, K-12 focused. And I'm a mother of 4 my oldest is 18, so he still counts though, right? I have 4 kids and 2 dogs and my husband, and yeah, we're just living it up in Michigan. And I want to give a shout out to Melody and David because I actually am in Oklahoma right now. So all 3 of us are in separate places here in Oklahoma. So beautiful land from what I could see, and looking forward to the presentation today. And welcome back, everybody I was scrolling and I see some familiar faces. So I appreciate you coming back and hearing what we have to say, and just looking forward to today. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Melissa, thank you so much. And next we have David Sullivan.
David Sullivan Khan. Melissa, I want to thank you for coming to Oklahoma and bringing the cool weather. Normally this time of year it's very, very hot, so I'm gonna assign that to your visit to Oklahoma. I am again as well. I'm glad to see familiar faces on this call from our last few sessions, and just I'm always humbled and thankful to be a part of these things that ultimately help our young students within our schools all across the country, because that's what we're here for. And so I've been working here at the school. I'm starting my 21st year. And so it's amazing that it's been that long, but it doesn't feel that long. It feels like I've just started still at times. So I'm very, very glad to be a part of the school district, very glad to be able to work with Melody as a part of the parent committee with our program. And she does a great deal of work for us and helps us a lot. Not only as a parent, but in so many other ways as one of our teacher candidates, or actually, well, we have a whole lot of things going on, but I'll just stop there and I'm thankful that we're all here together today.
Thank you so much, David. So if you guys are ready to get started, I'm going to give this to you.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, so this is Melody. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with kind of framing our conversation today. And then at various points, I'll invite David and Melissa to jump in. And so you'll hear from all 3 of us throughout this presentation. So today we really want to focus on social emotional learning. We want to talk about ways to implement social emotional learning, as well as think about ways to predict social emotional learning in students, especially in the midst of this health crisis, this pandemic that we're all kind of still dealing with, and we're all in various stages. And so we thought this was a really relevant topic. And so we invite you to share your thoughts as you're listening to us. We invite you to type questions that you might have in the chat, as well as just share out. We will have different opportunities for you to share as well as we go through our session. And then if you have any experiences or anything you'd like to add, feel free to enter those in the chat box as well. Go to the next slide. All right, so first we'll start with kind of some definitions to really help us frame our minds around the topic of social emotional learning. Next slide. All right, so what exactly is social emotional learning? Some of you may hear it called by the acronym SEL. We all like acronyms here as educators and professionals. So social emotional learning is essentially the process where all young people, adults, all humans acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and to make responsible and caring decisions. And so that is kind of a very general definition, and that is a definition based on research and evidence as defined by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Next slide. So social emotional learning can advance health of educational equity and really encourage authentic partnerships between schools, families, and communities, and really help to establish learning environments and experiences for students and their families that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. Social emotional learning can also help address the different inequities that we face and our students encounter, as well as empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. Next slide. So some of the research outcomes over the past several decades, these are just a couple highlights gathered from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning, and they really kind of keep their finger on the pulse of social emotional learning for K through or pre-K through 12th grade students across the United States. And so what they're saying is the research has found that social emotional learning can improve students' social emotional skills, attitudes, students' relationships, their academic performance, as well as their perception of their classroom and school climate, as well as social emotional learning can help to contribute to a decline in student anxiety, behavior problems, and substance use, as well as seeing some long-term improvements in student skills, attitudes, pro-social behavior, and academic performance. And again, cost-benefit analysis shows that social emotional learning in school districts as a whole is a very wise financial investment. It's worth our time to focus on and support our students with social emotional learning. Next slide. And I just also wanted to point you to a framework, and some of you may be familiar with this, but this is again through Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning. And what they did was they took all of the research that's out there. They collaborated with many different universities, colleges, school districts, all across the country, and created this framework for implementing social emotional learning in school districts, in school buildings, and in classrooms. And so they identified 5 areas of social emotional competence. And so those areas are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so those are the indicators and the measurement by which students would be able to benefit and to demonstrate whether or not they are actually able to grow in social emotional competencies through social emotional learning programs like your curricula, activities, things that you might be implementing in your classroom or in your school district. And so I thought this was it was a nice graphic that kind of pulled it all together, but also really highlighting the key evidence and kind of boiling everything down to these 5 key areas that are a really good starting point for understanding social emotional learning and really thinking about what that means in your classrooms and in your schools and in your communities. And before I move on, I just wanted to see if David or Melissa had anything to add to those kind of higher level definition pieces.
Just real quick, as I was looking at this model, you know, I have looked at this before, but what really struck me about it was that, you know, historically, and I don't want to speak in general terms because I know every school is different. Every school has a different focus, and then even at different time frames. You know, you may have a school leader that was very SEL sensitive and very, that was their focus. So at, say, a given time while they were at that school, they were really looking at all of these areas. And then it might change as someone goes away. And so, just looking at SEL and looking at it in the process, oftentimes these areas, these 5 broad competencies are considered to be something that historically the family provided or the community provided, and the school was more or less looking at the content, the instructional, the academic areas that have been considered. But as we're moving forward into our current time frame, we realize that we always need to have this context. And so within our schools, we, for several years, we've been working on trying to incorporate these elements, but it's just like I said earlier, when you have leadership changes and different things, it's hard to maintain those same levels sometimes. But what we're working on is trying to make that a part of the institution, that's so that no matter who's in those positions, we still have that system and structure. There are different ways to do that, but you can utilize a strategic plan, for a certain period, but really you need to have a constant process of professional development that really has that focus.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I just wanted to add as well that these 5 components, it's really also very important for you and your area, and school districts are different. And so, like, what do these things mean? What is self-awareness? What is self-management? What is social awareness? And so I will kind of share with you what my understanding of those are and the work that we do here. Well, not in Michigan right now, but if I was in Michigan, this is what we, how we kind of define those things. Self-awareness, knowing yourself and kind of how you're processing things and how you're reacting to things, and just kind of your mindset, and keeping an eye on self, being aware of that and knowing yourself. And that's difficult, especially for our children. We have a difficult time as adults, but our students still have to learn that. It's not just something people know, and creating that so that they can explain and describe what it is that they are feeling, and making those connections really helps. Teaching them how to make those connections really helps. Self-management. Okay, I have these thoughts and feelings and things that are happening. How am I going to manage that within myself? What works for me? Because what might work for me might not work for the person next to me, or the teacher, for example, might give you strategies. We have to know how to take those strategies, and we have to teach kids how to employ those strategies that work for them. Social awareness, how am I impacting others? If you ever have been in a group of people and there's somebody who's just kind of abrasive, or maybe they're just really joking around, and people are kind of you see on them like, okay, this is a little bit too much, it's overwhelming. Some people don't catch on to that, like they don't know how to read the room or how their presence is impacting other people, and how am I impacting the people in the environment around me, which is really important in classrooms, right? So we have 20 to 30 different personalities in a room, and how are they impacting each other, as well as the teacher that are in those classrooms. And then relationship skills. I think about that and how our young people, we just think that they know because we've had so much practice at doing that, but even adults aren't great at it. It takes a lot of practice and knowing exactly what that means and how we can, know how to engage in healthy relationships. Because some children might, know unhealthy relationships. And so how can we employ knowledge and strategies in them to develop healthy relationships? And then responsible decision making. Questionable decisions are very easy to make. what can we do to instill this in our students? And I think this model really looks at self, those around you, health, all of those important things that will ultimately impact the school environment, the school climate, as Melody was saying. So I just wanted to add that little definition of what each of those things mean and how we connect that with our students and even our families.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that. Those are really powerful examples. I see that we have a hand raised.
Hi, my name is Sia. I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska. It's getting colder up here, turning into fall. I always, when I ran I had the student support system in Anchorage with junior high students, and I would always hear students say, oh, she's such a you know what, or he's being a jerk, or blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, before you make assumptions, you need to think that you don't know how they slept last night. They don't know how, or you don't know what they're going through. I said, and so if you guys are reacting and acting out, you're not helping with that. So when a teacher is acting like that, you can say, okay, I need to pull myself back and I need to focus on my work like I should. But I think adults need to be aware of that, because I don't think we're all at the same healing rock or healing realm as everybody. And I do acknowledge my triggers, and I do acknowledge them to my students. And if they're not listening and I just went through a family emergency or something, I'm like, slow down. I'm going to react if you react this way. It's going to be very hard to be in here if you can't calm down. I said, I'm having a hard time today. I lost my grandma, or I'm not thinking straight, and I'm only human, but I'm acknowledging my pain, my grief, where I'm at, where I'm not stable. And by you talking or not doing what you're supposed to do to be successful, then this is the reaction that you shouldn't get from other adults, but you're going to get a bad reaction. So I think it's really hard for me when teachers don't acknowledge their pain to their kids, because I mean, kids don't know that. They know about their pain and they know about their night, and it's usually not that good. But yeah, I like all these self stuff and worth, and it's a good circle there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really wonderful reminder of how it's really important for us as adults to model these things, with our students and with each other too. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's definitely something we all can use some support on and support each other with developing those skills too. Awesome. Thank you. So let's see, we're going to go to the next slide. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about kind of some general definitions and kind of thinking about what exactly social emotional learning is, I wanted to share with you a kind of a passage from an article by two researchers who really were inspired to write this article because of the huge impact that this pandemic has had on our Native communities and our students, and also just how everything changed in 2020. And so they wrote this article called Why Trouble SEL, the Need for Cultural Relevance in Social Emotional Learning. And so I thought that this was a really good place to start and kind of just encourage us all to kind of think about, so how do we make sure that our social emotional learning programs are culturally relevant? So this is what they shared. Many SEL programs have been developed over the last 2 decades. Increasing research evidence shows that such programs can support development of the whole child and lead to improved academic achievement, employment, health, and well-being. However, because student learning and identity are shaped by cultural practices, situated life experiences, and many other variables converging in any context of social interaction, the development and expression of social emotional skills are affected by factors such as social historical context, including epistemic beliefs about the nature of knowledge and power dynamics. And so that just kind of is kind of a call to action for educators and school staff to really think critically about what the classroom and school district are currently doing with social emotional learning, but then also thinking about how relevant and how responsive are the current social emotional learning programs and activities to the students, and do those really truly reflect and respond to who the students are and who the community is and who the families are. And so really kind of thinking about that. And that's what we're going to get into here in the next few slides. Let's see, before I move on, I just wanted to see if David or Melissa wanted to share anything on that point.
I think we're ready to roll into the next slide. Melody, be wet.
Awesome. All right. So let's talk about, so given all of that kind of theoretical foundation, now how can we actually implement social emotional learning? And so as we go through these, encourage you to think about the things that you're currently doing in your work with students, in your classroom, in your school, and in your programs. Next slide. All right, so when implementing social emotional learning programs, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning recommends these 4 focus areas. They are to build foundational support and plan, strengthen adult social emotional learning competencies and capacity, which speaks to the point that Sia just shared earlier, that it's really important that adults need to build their own competencies around social emotional learning, and promote social emotional learning for students, and reflect on the data for continuous improvement. Next slide. So thinking about implementing social emotional learning, we're going to kind of get into, so how can you ensure that your activities and programs are truly culturally responsive? And so researchers have said that to incorporate Native culture and Native language into social emotional learning frameworks, researchers propose an interdisciplinary lens. So really thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally sustaining pedagogy, and really thinking about what that means for the curriculum that are currently being used, both academically and for any social emotional learning programs, as well as the pedagogy. So how is the instruction being conducted? How are the students being taught? And really thinking about across, not just stepping outside the box, and thinking of social emotional learning in all of the contexts that the students interact with. So, as we were talking about, students bring with them a home life, and they bring with them, and they all come from different situations. And so really thinking about getting to know the students and who they are, and really thinking about who are they culturally, what identity do they have, but also what does their language look like? Do they speak a native language? And really thinking about what does that mean to them, and what are they bringing to the classroom and to the schools, and really understanding that. Next slide.
Can I add to that, Melody?
Yeah.
If you don't mind?
Sure.
I just really appreciate this slide, because it really does put responsibility on us to build our cultural competence. And the most effective way to build cultural competence, because the reality is 80% or more of our teaching staff, our teaching workforce, the ones that are with our students the most, are teachers who are not of color, they're white teachers. And the dynamics and populations of students is so diverse. It's, you know, students of color who are, you know, Black, Native, you know, Muslim, Arabic, like all of those different minority populations. How could a teacher know all of those things that Melody referenced about students, not just from Native communities, but from all communities? And building cultural competence puts responsibility on the teacher to get to know those communities of people and reaching out and digging in to know and be able to answer all of those questions that Melody just posed. And so that's one thing that, you know, being in the classroom is one thing, but showing up at a football game, or, you know, if you're welcome to come to, you know, building those tribal partnerships so that you know what is appropriate to attend and what not to attend. You know, it takes a little bit extra time, but as we go along through this presentation, I think we're going to learn that those efforts do pay off, not just for the teacher, the student, and the whole school climate. And so, you know, just, you know, that responsibility of building cultural competence for our teaching workforce, I think will go a really long way and enhance the social emotional learning concept that we're talking about here.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. David?
I'd also like to add, you know, maybe going back to one of the slides you had earlier, you know, when you were talking about there towards the end of the SEL and the cultural relevancy, you know, when you had that, the quote there, it was talking about epistemic beliefs, you know, and looking at how, you know, the instructor, what their belief is about instruction. And that's, for me, what I'm hoping at some point we can get all of the instructional process to go to where it's not so much teacher-centered, but it's more student-centered. And so within that process, you will learn those cultural elements, not just culture in general, but the personal aspects and the aspirations of that student. So if we can get it to the point where they are really intentionally developing student agency, intentionally developing the process of letting the students be a little bit more in charge of their learning. Yes, of course, we know they have to follow the blueprints and all of the standards of the state, but within that, there is quite a bit of flexibility for the student to be able to work within that. And so as long as we're getting away from the cookie cutter approach or the blanket approach, and we're really looking at how each individual student learns and what they need for themselves so that they can grow and become who they need to be, then I think we're going to get there. But that's, like Melissa said, that is a lot more work, but it will pay off in the long run if we can ever get to that point. And sometimes it's hard for especially new people to the district to understand that. That's some of the challenges I have here at times.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, David. We'll go to the next slide because I think Melissa and David, you brought up really key points for us to kind of zoom in on and focus on as we think about culturally responsive social emotional learning. So really kind of challenging teaching staff to go beyond just what the curriculum says, because typically most of the evidence-based social emotional learning curricula are they speak in generalities, just like David just said, and they're very universal. They're intended to try to catch everyone and address everyone, which we know, especially for us who are working in our Native communities and with Native students, we need to really be able to focus in on who our students are and what those students are bringing with them to the classrooms and to the schools. And so this is where it's really important to empower our teachers and our school staff to really think critically and become more aware and be able to reflect on their own biases, their own beliefs, and their own assumptions, and then think about ways to adjust and incorporate culturally responsive practices into their instructional methods. And so this, this is, it can start with really small steps, and it can come from the administration as like, so either way it'll work. It's just, we all need to really think about ways that this could be possible to really accommodate the needs of our students. Because we know the research says it works, but it is definitely a challenging path to get there. One example would be, so culturally responsive pedagogy. Let me go to, so we kind of talked about this, like really thinking about a cultural lens. So the next slide kind of gets us into what exactly do we mean by culturally sustaining or revitalizing pedagogy? What does that mean? So culturally sustaining revitalizing pedagogy is really an approach that was developed to support the unique social and political needs of Indigenous youth. It was developed as an expression of sovereignty that prioritizes local communities' expressed interests, resources, and needs, and embraces community-driven Indigenous language and culture education practices. It also is an applied framework for instructional design, curriculum, and student family services that recognize asymmetrical power relations and legacies of colonization and the impacts of all of that. So culturally sustaining and revitalizing pedagogy also includes an acknowledgement of the historical trauma and intergenerational trauma that our students are coming from and what they are encountering. So an example of culturally sustaining or revitalizing pedagogy would be, some of you may have worked in or be familiar with language immersion, language revitalization. So in Native language revitalization programs, some programs occur in like after school environments. Some programs are like a classroom that the students go to. It might be a certain time of day that the students go to do some activities. So when the teacher is really able to teach through the language or teach through the lens of the student. So for instance, one example of this would be something that Anadarko Public Schools does every year is they do in the fall time in October, during the month of October, there's a whole week that is focused on Native American, because we're in an area where there are 7 different tribes. And so our school is very, very intertribal. And so there's always a lot of, everyone is very much intertribal and aware of each other's culture. And so there's lots of learning opportunities. And so there is a whole week, and then there are certain days during that week where the students rotate through different activities. So for instance, they'll bring in different elders to do storytelling, and they'll do storytelling in the Kiowa language and Comanche language and the languages. They'll also do drumming, they'll do singing, they'll teach the students, they'll give them a class on setting up and taking down a teepee, which is what our people used. And it's also an opportunity for the teachers to really also engage with the students. And so the students usually get really excited about it. Some of them are really involved through their families. And it's an opportunity for the teachers to really see a different side of the students. And so that would be one, small example of this idea of culturally sustaining and revitalizing pedagogy. So teaching from the lens that the students are coming from. So incorporating the unique aspects of the tribes and then the tribal communities that your school is situated in, incorporating those, bringing the elders in, bringing storytellers in, bringing your cultural and knowledge bearers in to the schools. So those are just some examples. I'm sure you all have lots more examples. I'm going to see if David or Melissa has anything they want to add here.
Well, first, there was a hand up.
Yes.
Let's see,
Teresa.
Teresa.
Yes, I'm sorry I've got the screen on. This is just a really bad hair day for me, okay?
No problem, Teresa.
I'll,
but can you
I'll
introduce
show my
yourself?
face next time. Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm really interested in the question of how you can kind of work with teachers that are resistant, or they aren't really necessarily resistant, they're afraid, I think, to do culturally sustaining work, to really understand. I've worked with a lot of tribal schools where there'll be teachers that I realize it's more prevalent probably in high school because they're very content driven in terms of their discipline. And they don't think that it's their job to do this cultural adaptation or culturally sustaining pedagogy. They've just worried about, teaching math and science and, history and whatever all those subjects are. But it just seems to me that's the big question, is how do you, in teacher education programs, I can see how we can advocate and actually really encourage people to get involved in culturally sustaining pedagogy. But I think sometimes people have jobs and they know that it's hard sometimes to even get a school staffed with the number of teachers that they need in more remote areas. And they basically just don't want to do it. And so that's been a heartbreak of mine. I've been in Indian education since 1971. And I do work in social emotional learning with a curriculum that I've developed. So I'm just really, I like the idea of kind of having cultural exchanges among the children's families and communities that teachers would attend. I think that's perfect, because you don't necessarily expect that teachers in their summers are going to go out to powwows and ceremonials and things like that. They may say they will, but they probably get busy and don't necessarily. I mean, when you realize that, when I think about the fact that 80% of the teachers in Indian schools are non-native, how do you do that?
Yep. They are.
Really looking for ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I really appreciate that and definitely acknowledge that. And I think that's something that we all feel to an extent. I'm going to go to the next slide really quick because I think that this slide might get a little bit at what you were, what that question, I think that's the ultimate question, right? Is how do we reach those teachers who are resistant or who don't know what they don't know? And how do we empower those teachers so that they do feel empowered to make connections? So I just wanted to share this quote, and then I'm going to open it up to David and Melissa, because I'm sure they have a lot to add here. So implementing culturally responsive SEL. Deep attention to cultural practice at both the micro and macro levels enables educators to develop a better understanding of the nuances of Indigenous cultural and linguistic practices, which have been tied to the land for centuries, and to center Indigenous knowledge as sources of well-being and healing. This requires recognition of the distinct epistemologies and histories that define our differences and equitable partnership with Indigenous educators and leaders. And so I'm going to open it up to see if David or Melissa has any thoughts on Teresa's question.
I have a few, or I won't go into a whole long process. I'm trying to keep aware of our time that we have left as well. But it is a challenge. We here in Anadarko, we were really working on that. We have a 5-year strategic plan, and that is one of our primary, it has 5 buckets, but that's one of our areas, is to increase that cultural instruction within all subject areas. But being able to do that it's been challenging. Yes, you can have the plan, you can have it out of that room, throughout the course of the school year. And so it required, it's not something that has an easy answer, because it requires having everyone on the same page. It requires having administrators who are aware of that, are capable of monitoring it throughout the course of a school year as they go in and they conduct observations and provide feedback. It's something that has to be fully developed. At one time, I was working with a group to where that was going to be one of our elements that we actually could try to work into the teacher and the principal, into the way that they're assessed and the way that they set their goals with the State Department of Education. But just like I mentioned earlier, as leadership changed within the state level, leadership changed at the district level, and also at the site level, the site leadership level, and the classroom. Our constant turnover is a factor as well, because just as soon as we get people to a place where they're starting to understand and they're starting to see the relevance and the need for it, something, life happens and they have to move on, and then we have to start over again. So it's just a constant process. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic plan. There's nothing there. It just requires consistency and hard work. And unfortunately, that's the only answer I've found over the course of especially in the last 10 years since I've been in the district, and the work that we've been trying to do here. And it's not over yet, but it's still challenging, but we still have a lot of work we definitely have more room to grow, but where I see us now has been, it's encouraging to know that we've made some progress.
Melissa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said so far. It is challenging even in a tribally controlled school on the reservation. We have seen that issue. Knowing, and it blew my mind in the beginning, right? Like, you're applying to a tribal sovereign school and you don't want to engage with the community. Like, it was just kind of perplexing to me. But I want to say just, I think it's systemic. And so what we've done is we've taken the approach of embedding different, and we do have the flexibility to do that as a sovereign school. We've been embedding components in. So David mentioned teacher evaluation. We use the Danielson's framework for our teachers. We've added a fifth domain, and that fifth domain is about culturally responsive teaching. And do we see that in their classroom? Do the kids see themselves in their classroom? The environment, is language used, things like that. So we've done that. We have also, during the interview process, started to ask very direct questions about what it means to work for a tribally controlled school, so that they have an understanding, and knowing that when we do cultural things, that it's not optional, but that we expect them to be in attendance with a good heart and an open mind. And we are very fortunate to have a teaching lodge, our traditional teaching lodge longhouse in the back of our school, where we meet weekly, and having them participate in that and bringing them along. We've also incorporated, we've indigenized our school calendar. So there are days that are specific to, so instead of celebrating President's Day, we celebrate our Gima, like our chiefs and our history for our tribe. And we invite them in, and we have, teachers, come up with questions with their students that they want to ask, and they learn that way. And so there's a lot of creative things that we've done in that way, but it remains difficult. It's a very difficult thing to work around or work with. But I can tell you that the people who really do buy in are the ones that thrive and have that deepest connection with their students. They have the reduction in office referrals and behaviors and things like that. And so we empower them to appreciate our culture, but not to appropriate our culture. And so we've, made that very clear on what is okay in our community, as far as those two things are concerned. So there's there's not a magic wand. We have all of that embedded and we still see it. You know, we encounter that difficulty every now and then, but we always make sure to elevate the ones that are, you know, just engaging, and, you know, the reduction in office referrals, you know, we kind of make, in a good way, not to make them a target or anything, but we make them the example for the other teachers, like, oh, you know, the PE teacher showed up at the football game, or, and, you know, came to the powwow. And I have to say that, you know, those things probably are working, because I've seen more teachers come to our July celebration than I have any other year. And so, you know, once you embed those things, or you're able to figure out what works for you in your area, to bring the teachers along that are willing, it will kind of generate out to the other ones, the ones who are maybe on the fence about it, who aren't comfortable maybe, to see that, yes, it is okay, but you're always going to have resistors. The ones who are on the fence and the ones who are ready are going to outnumber the resistors. You just have to find them. So that's kind of my advice about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you, David. Those are some wonderful experience directly from the field. Really appreciate that. And there's a couple of questions in the chat that I see. And I believe that this session is being recorded. So you'll get a follow-up message. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and add to that, if you don't mind, Melody.
Yeah.
They will be recorded. It'll be on our website and our YouTube channel at Native Center for Behavioral Health. Also, if you are wanting something specifically for your area, we can arrange that as well. So if your area or your school community needs more culturally responsive SEL, or just SEL in general, please reach out to us and we will be glad to provide that training for you.
Thank you. All right, so this is awesome. And I think it's a great segue to our next slide. So a lot of what we were just talking about really kind of digs into what exactly can schools do, and how can teachers actually implement culturally responsive practices. And so here's kind of some bullet points that the research says this is what is possible. So when teachers and school staff can integrate Native language and culture, some of the examples that Melissa just shared are really awesome examples of I like how you framed that, Melissa, indigenizing your school calendar. I love that. And that's a beautiful example of integrating your traditional lifeways into the school calendar. And that's definitely a good example of being culturally responsive. So when you do those things, then these things will happen. So you'll really look at, as an educator and as school staff and as school administrators, think about ways to connect the students' academic concepts that are being taught with the students' cultural knowledge that they're bringing with them to the classrooms. So making very specific connections between the academic content and the students' cultural knowledge. And so that requires a lot of potential group planning time, some bringing teachers together. I know Anadarko Public Schools has done some communities of practice, communities of learning. We're bringing different, you mentioned, Melissa, you got to find your champions, right? So you find those teachers that are going to go out there and really champion these type of approaches, and really give them some time and opportunity to do group planning and brainstorming to develop their lesson plans, and ensure that the activities that they're implementing really do connect meaningfully the students' cultural knowledge with those academic content that they need to get across. The next indicator would be to create space for the students to reflect on their own lives and society on their own terms. So really thinking about, no matter what age group you're working with, there are ways to create safe spaces for the students to really think about what's happening in their life and how do they view the world, so that they can kind of process some of the things that we talked about in the beginning that are really key to having social emotional competency, that kind of self-awareness. Mindfulness is a huge catchphrase now, but really allowing students time to reflect on their own experiences, but also the world around them. And really giving them that space within the school day so that they can start understanding, like, for instance, if they're preparing for a ceremony that's coming up on the weekend, and, you know, giving them space to process that with other students is really important. The next point would be that to support cultural competence by investing time and resources to support students to learn about their own culture and other cultures. So again, just thinking about who the students are and creating opportunities for students to do peer-to-peer interactions and peer sharing with each other about their culture. And if they haven't had the opportunity, you know, some of our students come from families that are not as culturally connected, or we lost our language and we don't have elders to go to. And so really thinking really creatively and being intentional about supporting those students so that they do feel empowered to embrace who they are as people and as Native people. And then also help them to understand that there are other cultures out there, and how do you interact with other cultures, and how can we respect each other from a cultural lens. Like I said, in our area, there's 7 different tribes around here. So, you know, the students all grow up and really are kind of aware of all the different nuances that each of these 7 different tribes has, and grow up having that respect towards each other. And then finally, this last point is really giving the opportunity for students and teachers to pursue social justice through critiques of discourses of oppression. And so someone mentioned that it really is a systemic issue, and that there's a lot more that our teacher education programs can do at the universities and colleges. There's a lot more that our school leadership and our administrators can do, but also just really challenging ourselves to think about how can we provide a safe space to have meaningful and intentional dialogue about the things that are, it's kind of like you have to face the elephant in the room. You have to speak it to be able to acknowledge that it's there, acknowledge that it happened, and then work through it and process it with each other. And so creating that space for students to do that, but also for teachers to really understand. Like in our school district, David mentioned all of the turnover. We get teachers that it's like almost a revolving door sometimes. Like I know in the pre-K, you know, we get new teachers coming fresh out of school. They teach for 1 year and they realize it's not what they want to do, and then they go and there's another teacher. So then it's really becomes a challenge to have some type of system in place to support those teachers when they're first coming into the school district in the classroom, to really understand who their students are and really empowering them to ask questions and to get to know the protocols that we all have and the family, you know, makeup, who the families are in the community. And so really thinking critically about how can you, as a teacher, as a leader, how can you create those spaces? And so I wanted to, before moving on, wanted to just see if Melissa or David would like to add anything to this part.
I did want to add, you know, it is very important that we, you know, that we set those timeframes. You know, we've had a history here of trying to develop those opportunities, not only for our students, but for our teachers. Sometimes it worked well, but you know, one other factor, you know, you're right, teacher turnover is high, but we also have a teacher shortage, you know, where we are working sometimes with folks that didn't even fully go through the educational process for, you know, or they went through a different area. They, you know, they maybe went through some other line of education, but they, you know, because we have the shortage, then we have people here that are emergency certified. Doesn't mean that they're not competent, but it just means that we have more of a challenge to get them ready for what needs to happen for our students. And just real quick, one thing that I do want to point out, you know, that's vital, I think, in terms of the cultural aspect, is that I like that third bullet where it's talking about our own cultures as well as our other tribal cultures, but also a global perspective. And so that's one thing I've always wanted to do, is to make sure that for our kids that they have global opportunities to connect with people. And we, just one quick example, we've had a group that has come in the last 4 to 5 years to provide, and they're from South Korea, and they provide a camp for us every summer. And then we're working with them to try to do other things throughout the year. So they bring in the other cultures. They have connections with other folks as well. So, we have South America and other places where, we're trying to get our kids to have those connections, not just on a national basis, but also, international as well.
Thank you, David. Melissa, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I said a lot the last time I talked and gave really specific examples, but that last bullet really resonates with me because such a high percentage of the teaching workforce, are 80% are white, 80% or more are white, depending on where you're at. I think that really speaks to the necessity to build allies with our teaching workforce. And what does it mean to be a good ally? Because we hear that term quite often, and I think this bullet captures, captures that point that, all right, you're building your cultural competence, you're teaching our, different populations of students, but you also, we want to really encourage them to also be allies, and that's, the social justice critiques of discourse or oppression, that they can be really helpful in doing that, the champions anyway. And then others, like I said, will come along. But yeah, that's just kind of the thoughts that I had when looking at that last bullet. Like, that's so important and it's so necessary. Yeah, we do need to diversify the teacher workforce at some point, but until then, let's build those allyships with those teachers and educators and administrators, school boards, all of the people involved in the system for the benefit of our students.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now we're going to focus on, so what does this all mean in the context of, we're in the midst of this global pandemic that's going on, and in some, parts of our country, it's re-emerging, resurging, and just creating all kinds of uncertainty. So let's think about that. Next slide. So really thinking about, there's an opportunity here when you're reopening schools and reopening, and also thinking about the different modalities of instruction in this upcoming school year. And some of you may have already started school, or you're getting ready to start school. This is an opportunity to really focus and think about how can social emotional learning be incorporated, but how can that social emotional learning also be culturally relevant to the students and the families and the community that you serve. Next slide. And so just some opportunities are that we talked about many of these points, so I'll just go through these really quickly. School professionals could intentionally dialogue with students to identify specific strengths and resources that enable them to remain engaged in the system despite obstacles and oppression. And teachers, school administrators can determine how they are currently implementing SEL at their schools and how SEL is informed by the actual experiences of the students and the community. And then also, educators must have the courage to engage in honest self-reflection about personal biases, which might elicit uncomfortable emotions about inequity. So really, again, going back to thinking about where are the opportunities and how can school leadership create safe spaces for the teachers themselves and the school staff who work directly with students and implement SEL curricula to really dialogue with each other and process some of that self-awareness and mindfulness, and really thinking about what does that mean in terms of implementing culturally responsive practice? Next slide. All right, so with that in mind, the Castle, the center that we talked about earlier mentioned, so they've developed this actually a social emotional learning roadmap for reopening schools. They developed this actually last fall, but we thought it was might be relevant and a handy resource to reference now. Oh, I'm hearing some background noise. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. So there are 4 critical practices that were identified as opportunities to really think about social emotional learning in the context of reopening. And so really thinking about critical practices for reopening schools. The first one is to take the time to cultivate and deepen relationships, build partnerships, and really intentionally plan for how teachers will and school staff will implement social emotional learning alongside and in tandem with your academic content in this upcoming school year. So really think about where is the time and where is the opportunity to really think about who are the partners that need to be at the table, who are the people that need to be at the table, and who can be involved in really planning intentionally for social emotional learning in this upcoming school year. Next slide. The next critical practice is to design opportunities where adults can connect, heal, and build their capacity to support students. So we know that something that has come up a lot over the past year during this pandemic is teacher burnout, and really trying to help teachers understand, educators understand how they can engage in self-care and really think about their own social emotional capacity. And so really think about as a school leader, how can schools provide opportunities for the educators themselves to connect, heal, and build their own capacity to support the students and really feel empowered. We want to empower our educators so that they can be a resource and a resource for those students.
Hey, Melody, can
Yes.
you give me an example of that, please?
So I guess something that comes to mind here would be if you have an opportunity in your school to have a teacher professional development day, maybe during the next teacher professional development day, when there's no students in the classrooms, you bring all the teachers and teacher assistants and school staff together. And really, you could also maybe have someone be a facilitator or a mediator, but you want someone to kind of facilitate a dialogue. And you could have something like a talking circle, or you could have small group discussions where you give people a prompt and then you have them talk amongst each other. Just create a safe space for them to process. And so a lot of times, during this past year, there's a lot of people have dealt with trauma. We've all dealt with grief to some extent. The students have dealt with grief. And so this is about the school leadership really providing a space for the teachers to help to process professionally, like to really think about that it's okay to acknowledge that the students are exhibiting some behaviors, or that the teacher's emotions might be all over the place, or the teacher might be it's so uncertain. We're in this like uncertainty, and how should a teacher deal with that? And it's okay. It's okay. Like, so just acknowledging that. A lot of times there might be a mental health professional in your community that you can bring in to serve as a support system, and also who might be willing to serve as a facilitator or mediator for some large group and small group activities for your teachers. but really thinking about how can the school support the teachers so that the teachers feel like they are supported and that they can then in turn be empowered to support the students. So we want to really make sure that there's those opportunities for the adults. And then hopefully with that support in place, and it might mean maybe you take more professional development days during the next school year. Maybe you take, half a day every few weeks for the teachers to really just connect and process what they're hearing in the classrooms. So things like that. And I'm sure you all might have some ideas about that. Hopefully that helped. Next slide. So there's two more to get through, and I want to be mindful of our time as well. So the third critical practice for reopening is to create safe, supportive, and equitable learning environments that promote all students' social emotional development. So really ensuring that students have a sense of belonging and have consistent opportunities to learn, reflect, and practice social emotional competencies. So students have gone through this past school year in a variety of teaching formats, right? You have some that are virtual, some that are on Zoom, some that are doing like online, some that are in person. You have hybrid models, like everything in between. And so acknowledging that no matter where those students may have been as far as their learning, that they do belong in a classroom community, even if you have to be virtual for a little bit, or even if you still have to do some type of hybrid model, create a sense of community and a sense of belonging for those students so that then they can really work to engage in that academic learning. So it's really focusing on how to connect the social emotional competencies with the academic content. Next slide. And so the fourth critical practice was to use data as an opportunity to share power, deepen relationships, and continuously improve support for students, families, and staff. So really thinking about all of the data that is being collected currently. So data can look like your lesson plans. It could be the themes that you pull from teachers' lesson plans. It can be your assessment data, that you do. Maybe you do formative assessment. You have summative assessment data, student data. You might also have data from parent surveys. Maybe you did parent surveys, or maybe you do a community needs assessment or a community survey of some sort. So really thinking about the different data points and what data is available, and really thinking about exploring that data together and using that as an opportunity to reflect and assess and improve your process for implementing social emotional learning throughout the school year. So really having that attitude of continuous improvement and really make data-driven decisions across multiple data sets and multiple types of data. So having conversations with parents, having a conversation with a student's family member, and the teacher documents that's a data point. And so what does that tell us about how well we're doing and how well we're implementing what we set out to achieve at the beginning of the year? Next slide. And so this kind of summarizes this. We talked a little bit about this, but this is just kind of a summary slide that really, it's something that you can reference, but what is a safe, supportive, equitable learning environment look like? And so these are some key points, and I want to be mindful of our time. So these slides will be shared with you, and we touched on a lot of these already. So we're going to go to the next slide. And then, of course, when, in the midst of this health crisis, this pandemic that we're in, it's really crucial to have a trauma-informed lens for anyone who's working with students. And so really thinking about what that means. And so thinking about students' social, emotional, and academic development. Many students and adults have experienced extraordinary stress and trauma throughout the past 18 months. And then really understanding what trauma is and how stress and trauma can affect the brain and can impact not only the adult's ability to function and teach, but also the student's ability to learn and develop and grow. And so really being sensitive to trauma and the different types of trauma that students might have encountered, and also being sensitive and giving the teachers, the educators, making sure that you're being sensitive to your own traumas as well as to teachers' traumas as well, and creating that opportunity for empowerment and a supportive environment for adults and students. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, but I wanted to, we have some resources, but I wanted to first see if David or Melissa had anything they wanted to add.
Not at this time. I think you covered a lot in just a very short amount of time, just within this last section. So I'd like to leave time for any other questions or any feedback from our participants.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I'd like to see if anybody in our Zoom audience has anything, our virtual audience has anything that they really want to ask or add to or discuss. I want to leave time for that as well.
Hi, this is Carol. Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any curriculum out there for, say, middle school students or high school, post-secondary students, high schoolers, if there's any curriculum that is, because I love this frame here right now, but is there any kind of curriculum out there for teaching neurobiology of trauma to students? That way they can understand the dopamine dump, like bring it down. Because if you talk to kids about neurobiology of trauma, they're just gonna like, oh, check out. Or just point me out somewhere.
That is a wonderful question. Can we go to the resource slides really quick? There is actually a resource. So here's the reference. All the links are in the slides. But the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning is a really good place to start. Next slide. This is a resource from the National Indian Child Welfare Association. Next slide. This is a resource on pyramid model innovations if you work with pre-K or kindergarten or even younger students. Next slide. Here's another resource on different social emotional learning activities. Next slide. These are going really fast because I'm trying to get to your, here it is. This is the one, hopefully this will help you. So this is, CASEL has developed a SEL program guide. And so this is for pre-K through 12th grade. And it's to support school districts in selecting evidence-based SEL programs. And of course, yeah, I would say none of these are actually adapted for Indigenous Native youth and students, but because they're evidence-based, there has been studies that show that they can be successfully culturally adapted. So if you start with one of these curriculum, then hopefully you can work together with your school, with your teachers, with your community and your elders to make it appropriate and relevant to the students in your community. But the website is here and this is a really good place to start. And I'm hopeful that they have a curriculum you can find that will help you.
Thank you. I'm in love with the previous slide too, the one that went you a couple ones back. Thank you.
Awesome. And I see we have a hand up.
Hi, it's me again. The one thing that I stress, because I have done education from K through 6 and then Head Start, and I've taken my courses to be complete in that. I have a bachelor's in elementary ed. Now I work with junior high and high school students. And when I made that step to do that, everybody was like, oh, you're going to be dealing with Head Start kids again. And I'm like, Yeah, but everything can be adapted to age level. And the way that I've learned about trauma is that kids don't understand that when they first experience their first trauma and they've never dealt with it, that's when they stop emotionally developing. And parents and teachers don't understand that either, because I mean, in the age that I come from, I had a teacher say, well, I'm Native and I had an alcoholic family and blah, 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 and I'm here today. And I felt like saying, well, that's the reason why you're reacting to this situation in such a negative way. I wanted to tell her that, but then I didn't, because she was, I mean, going through a divorce. I mean, she's not going to listen to me anyway, but it's just so hard to explain to kids about trauma, and then also to understand, because I work with, I'm on a grant with OJJDP, which is for Juvenile Justice Department, and our kids are at high risk for all the ACEs, and so they've gone through more trauma than I ever have in my 48 years of life, whether that be loss of family or parents or alcohol, drugs and alcohol. And it's hard for me to handle, but I do it on a day-to-day basis. And so I just practice self-worth and self-reflection with them a lot, and try to tell them to put good thoughts out there about things. But I could go on and on about this subject because I have grown to understand it so much in my adulthood.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I feel like we definitely need more time to talk through, you know, all these things that, and I just love hearing everything that you're sharing, and that everyone, you know, what you've all put into the chat. Just really appreciate all of you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Teresa.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I wanted to let everybody know. Number one, we are developing an American Indian and Alaska Native toolkit on social emotional learning. We've already gotten several pieces completed. We're doing it for elementary and the high school kids. So you will be seeing that soon. It'll be on our website. There will be announcements once we have that ready. Also, we have partnership with NAFA, if anybody's ever heard with NAFA, to provide 2 training programs for free for people in our Native communities, so that you could be trainers to go out and train your community. So we're very, very excited about that. We have also partnered with COPA. If you look online, COPA is the biggest nationwide IEP advocacy program there is. We have partnered with them to adapt their curriculum specifically for American Indians and Alaska Natives. And we are going to be providing free training and certifications so that you can be a parent advocate or a community advocate in your Native community. So we have a lot of things in the works, so definitely stay tuned and start looking and making sure that you're looking at our announcements as we go through this year. I just want to say thank you again, everybody. Does anybody have any questions on today's presentations? Anybody else? Comments or questions? Okay, I know we've passed time. We always run out of time. But great questions, great presentation. Tomorrow we will be back here again, same time, 2 to 2:30 p.m. Central Time. Yes, and it's just for Q&A. So it is your time to come and ask any questions you want about all 3 sessions that we've had. The first session was about reopening planning. I know that some communities are panicking. I know that some communities started that they were going to go online, open the doors. Everybody was planning on going back to school, and they have now switched to completely online. So if you have any questions about reopening plans, please come back tomorrow. Also, we'll be talking and discussing again about SEL and supports for teachers, because they are definitely needing our supports and just services almost just as much as our children these days. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you again, Melody, Melissa, and David. You guys are wonderful, and I just appreciate you guys so, so much. If we don't have any other questions today, I'm going to give it over to Melody. She's going to leave us on a good note, and then we can say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm going to go ahead and say our closing prayer. So let's bow our heads. Bedatsai. Dumoyom da ki. Aim don't ta da ki kida sat de da de get taint so ame. Aim agya da ki get ta a ka da ki de on de on da tido a keep a da aim da ki de ki aim da dogya on da they aga be get don get so da uibe de honde yang hai get da kya ta da ki aho de bat ha aho over ha. Father God, you have allowed us a new day. Please help us. We come to you. We're pitiful. We come to you in a humble way, Father God. How wonderful that you watch over us when we're afraid. You're the only one that we can turn to. We ask for you to care for us and watch over us and our families, to heal us in thought and body. And you know everything, and please take care of all of us and our families. Take pity on us, and please accept our gratitude, and thank you for all your blessings. Aho, amen.
Aho. Thank you so much, Melody. David, would you like to say any words?
Yes, thank you, Melody. I think I really appreciate not only our work together here in the community, but I really appreciate what you brought to this today. I think it was a very great, very informative session. And so thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, David. Melissa?
You want us to follow up Melody on that? So beautiful. Miigwech for that. I just want to say miigwech to everybody that joined us today. I hope everybody stays safe in their homes, on their travels. Difficult times are coming, decisions are going to be made, and that you just show yourself and those around you grace. Nobody has the answer right now, and whatever decision is made for yourself, for your schools, it'll be difficult. And so to just try to understand that the people that are making those decisions don't have an easy way of doing that. And so to just be graceful with yourselves and with each other.
Great to end this. Thank you so much for that, Melissa, David, Melanie. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody else for being here today. Have a great Thursday. Have a safe weekend, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye, Carol.
Oh, bye. Yeah, I was just going to tell you, I was on Native America Calling yesterday as one of the guest panelists about COVID and reopening, because I'm on the school board here.
Uh-huh.
So I'm really excited about tomorrow's talk.
Yeah, come in and ask any questions you want to.
So it's at
That's
2
what
o'clock.
they're there for. 2 o'clock, same time tomorrow, 2 o'clock Central Time.
I thought I heard that, but yeah, I was so busy. I was on a mental health panel this morning for BIPOC mental health providers in Kansas City. So I'm just like, yes, I'm there.
Yep.
Thank you,
I'll be here
Miigwech.
tomorrow.
I'll be here tomorrow.
Okay. See you
Bye.
then. See you.